recording this webinar, and Sarah will be recording this webinar as well in English. We have a simultaneous interpretation, so if you prefer to listen to the original, just pick the original. If you want to listen to the Ukrainian language interpretation, just select the Ukrainian channel. And I will start recording now.
Вітання, любе товариство. Сьогодні я
Greetings,
Світлана
dear
Мельник,
colleagues.
старша лекторка кафедри
I'm happy to
нонрезиденціал
welcome
європейського
you here in
культурно-спільновий
our
семінар.
event.
І
My name is Svetlana Melnik,
оголошую
and
нашу доповідачку
I would like now to
Олександру
announce
Гуменну,
our
експертку
first
в сфері
speaker.
креативу і
This is
свободолюбного,
Oleksandra
кандидат
Humenna, who is an
економічних
expert
наук,
in the sphere of
доцент,
creative
кафедра
economics. She
математика і
is has
інформатика
a
університету
PhD in
Києво-Могилянської
economics,
академії
and she is
Міжнародного
from Kyiv-Mohyla
Інституту
Academy. And currently, she is a research
комунікації
fellow at the
Олександра має значний професійний
Institute
досвід
of
викладання
Modernization of
високих
Education. She has an
програмно-аналітичних
extensive experience
завдань,
in the sphere
досвід
of higher education,
2021 року
particularly also in the sphere of the management of educational institutions. She used to be an administrator of Kyiv-Mohyla Academy, and also she took part in the project Salvador Dali of Salvador Dali
Шановні
Academy.
колеги, як каже
Greetings,
Костя,
dear
і що мені
colleagues.
сьогодні презентувати свій
Well,
дослід.
here is
Дослід
my
буде
turn
складатися з таких
to present my
трьох
study,
частин,
and it will be
які
comprised mostly of
тема
three
надто
parts.
широка. Да? Якщо
As
говорити тільки
this topic
про
is
всю
too broad
культуру,
in
то
scope,
звичайно
speaking about
важко
culture in
вписати
general.
у цілісне
And of
відео і
course,
чудово
I
мене
need to
на
say
сьогоднішній
a
день
couple of
дуже
words
цікавлять.
about
А другий
sustainable
момент
development goals and
народом
why I'm
відомий це звичайно
particularly interested
креативна
in those
економіка
goals.
і
And of
розвитку
course, I could
якого
not
власне
but
під час
mention
війни.
the creative
Тож
economics
творчий
and
дослід.
the
І
state of
далі
affairs
розповім
in
трохи про такий
culture,
доволі новий
cultural
концепт, який
affairs,
називається
and
корпоративна
the
культурна
creative
відповідальність
industries.
бізнесів.
And also, I would like to
Тому такий
introduce
будуть трохи
this
як три частини,
new
але
notion, which
всі
is
вони
called corporate
відкриті під
cultural
одну під один
responsibility.
ціль.
All these
Це
notions are related
сприятливість
to the overarching aim, which is
ролі
to
культури
foster
через
the
культурних креативних
growth of
індустрій через
culture
розбудову
by
колективної
means of
економіки.
facilitating
І
development of
з
creative
тим, щоб
industries
ми
and
таки
by means
досягли
of
прогресу в
promoting
цілях сталого розвитку.
creative
Я
economy
починаю
so that we could
демонструвати екран.
attain the sustainable development goals.
Презентація
So
буде
I would like to
англійською,
share my
але
screen
власне
now.
все буде
My
озвучено
presentation is in the English
в цей
language,
спосіб, як
but
буде
I
виглядати на
will
екрані. Да?
speak
Все буде
Ukraine,
проаналізовано словесно.
and I will
От,
give you the verbal
ну,
description of what is on
поки
the
я скажу
slide.
кілька слів про
And now
цілі
let me tell you a couple of words about
чому
the Sustainable
факти вони
Development Goals
відбуваються.
and
Перш за
why
все,
I
я
am
додам до
that
того,
much
щоб
interested
ви могли
in
прочитати і
this
почути про мій досвід, що за
goals.
ці 2
If
місяці
you
чи
have read my
2-3 місяці
biography,
серпня,
you
як
must have
цього
noticed
року, у
that
мене
in the
було
past three
кілька дуже
months,
результативних
since
спроб,
August
зокрема
this
участь у
year,
якості
I
експерта економічних цілей
started
проєктів
a
співпраці
couple of new
підготовки національного
activities, the
добровільного звіту
preparation of
досягнення України
economic
в цілях
goals
цифрового розвитку.
and as the part
Проект
of
виконується на
the
власне замовлення
voluntary
секретаріатом
report
Кабінету міністрів
on
України та за
SDG
підтримки UNDP.
attainment
Я
by
жовтня цього
Ukraine.
року
And this
член-основою
is
Асоціації
the
експертів
project
сталого
that is run by
розвитку,
the
зокрема,
Department of
була в
Ministry of
якості
Ukraine
експерта саме за
and
креативну
is
економіку.
supported by
Чому ж
the
важливо на
United Nations
сьогодні
Development
робити
Program.
акцент на досягненнях
Why should we
Україною цілей
focus
сталого розвитку? Я тут не
at
лише
the
звичайно Україна,
Sustainable
але для
Development
нас
Goals
є
attainment
особливі
for
цікаві
Ukraine? Not
виклики
only for Ukraine,
і
but for
певні
Ukraine,
вимоги, які
these
ми самі на
goals
себе маємо
pose quite a
виставляти.
challenge,
Як би нам не
and we
було
know
на
that
сьогоднішній день
it
складно,
means
але
that we have
відновлення
certain
та подальший
commitments
розвиток
undertaken.
України ми вже зараз повинні
Despite hard
планувати
times,
на
we need
засадах
to think about the
сталого розвитку
future
і
of
звітності
Ukraine, and it should be based on the
концепт
sustainable
індустріальних
development
нуль, який
principles, with
передбачає якраз
the
сталість,
consideration,
стійкість і
but taking into
відновлюваність.
consideration the concept of Industry
Іноді чую такі
5.0,
вислови, що ми живемо у
which
своїй
means
4.0 році, а
sustainability,
вже
and
говоримо про індустрію 5.0.
this principle
І
is
знов ж таки такі
human-centered.
ці складові,
Quite often I
Ось
hear that we have not attained the goals of Industry 4.0, and now we are attaining these new goals of Industry 5.0. But I think that they are not contradictory. Let me remind you that in 2019, the president of Ukraine um, issued a decree on sustainable development goals and their adjustments to the specifics of development of Ukraine. And the cabinet of ministers set out the framework for the sustainable development goals to be attained. Alexandra, could you slow down a little bit for the
Якщо
purposes of the
серйозно, то так.
interpretation?
Добре. Звичайно, коли от Україна приєдналася до глобального
Of
процесу
course, when Ukraine
дотримування
joined the
сталого
global effort of
такого
attainment of sustainable
від
development goals,
завдання та
the
індикатори,
tasks
які
and the
мають
indicators
так званий локалізований
that
ефект або
are
локалізований
supposed to have
положительний
the
зміст,
local
вони були
nature
доопрацьовані і
or that
власне
are
ми в
supposed to have
20
local
політичну
impact. That
реформу
was what we were
всього
working
розвитку
on.
і сталого
And
розвитку
In
під
July
керівництвом
2020,
спеціальної ради
on
ООН Україна
the
представила
Sustainable
світовій
um,
спільноті перший
Development
добровільний національний
Conference,
дозвіл
Ukraine
на
presented
досягнення
the
вуличного
first
благоустрою.
voluntary review on
Саме
Sustainable Development Goals attainment.
український зміст і
And
український перелік завдань індикаторів, які
Ukrainian tasks
засвідчені
and
відповідно до
indicators, of
інтерпретації
course,
найкраще. Ось
cannot
також
change the
ці
goals themselves. You can see them on
куди
the screen, but the tasks and the indicators have been adjusted to
повинна
the
поступитися
local conditions. And
державі
in
і
Ukraine, we
180
have adopted 86
і власне
tasks
зараз
and
спільно з
183
іншими
indicators.
експертами з
Currently,
соціальної
we
сфери
are working
розробляють
on
пріоритети екологічного розвитку,
the
другий національний зміст
second
досягнення
national
Україною прогресу,
re-
незалежно від того,
review on
2019
the
чи
SDG progress.
2030.
This will be
Ми
for the
розуміємо, що
reporting
це
period of
складні війни, що це
2019-2022.
непівісний,
We do
повномасштабний
understand
світ,
that
тим не
those
менш,
are the years of the
і ці
pandemic,
роки будуть описані
and
викликом, який mає бути
those are the years of the
проаналізований під час
full-scale
міжнародних
war.
засідань
Therefore, the circumstances will be reflected in that review, and it will
Що
all be
хотіла би
presented
сказати?
on
Моє
during
близьке,
meeting in
тісне
2024.
знайомство з цілями сталого розвитку розпочалося з роботи
I
над
started working
пілотним
with
таким
SDGs
соціально-економічним
in the
дослідженням
context
рівнем
of
ставки,
the social
який
economic
має назву
survey, which was
доктрина
rather
збалансованого
broad in
розвитку
scope, and it is called the
(2030).
Doctrine of
Це дослідження
Sustainable
публіковане
Development
було
and
в
Balanced
2014 році
Development,
і
Ukraine
2018
2030.
році.
This
І відповідно в ньому
publication
ми
was
проїхали
presented
майже
to the
по всіх
larger audience
регіонах
in
України,
2018 when we
інші
toured around
регіони написали
Ukraine
власну
and
візію
almost all the regions of
такого
Ukraine. We were
збалансованого розвитку
collecting
України
comments and
в
then we prepared the
загальній мірі.
white
І
paper
це
on
досвід
this
дослідження
doctrine. This is
частково
a rather
з багатьох
ambitious
прикладів.
study which
Це
is based on the
конференція,
efforts
яку
of the experts
представляла
from various
і
educational institutions, including
університет
Kyiv
імені
Могила
Тараса Шевченка,
Academy,
Київський
and
національний економічний
this
університет імені
institution,
Вадима
Kyiv
Ілліча
National Economic
і
University, Kyiv
Національний
National
аграрний
Taras Shevchenko
інститут
University,
природи, природокористування,
National
це
University
Національний агротехнічний
of
університет України,
Natural
Київський
Resources,
політехнічний інститут імені Сікорського.
and
І
Kyiv
далі наводить
Polytechnical
дослідження знайшло своє
Institute
продовження саме
after
в
Sikorsky. And
регіонах України, і
this
такими нашими
study
співавторами
was
є
then
Вінницька
presented in the
обласна
regions of
науково
Ukraine.
технічний інститут
Therefore, it is
Сіверський.
co-authored by many
В цій
Ukrainian researchers and
книзі ми
experts. Some of them
запропонували
might be even
таку
present here today.
human-centrичну модель,
In this
яка
white
може
book,
впроваджуватися
we
в
are
методі
offering this human scientific
де
model, which you can see
три
on
вислови
this second
наводився він у нас
page.
теж
You
в
see that
процесі брейнстормінгу такого. Це
this graph
приклади
has three
один
facets,
він
and we
представляє
came
ті
up with this
речі,
idea
які важливі для
after
кожної людини.
brainstorming with Ukrainian
Human
researchers.
centrичність ми, звичайно,
The
розглядаємо з точки
human
зору, що
centricity
людина в
is
центрі
viewed
роботи,
not
але
just
усі
from the
державні
point of view that
політики
we are
мають
on the
бути
top of the
спрямовані на
pyramid in
людину.
nature,
Тобто
but
людина в
from the point of
основі
view that all of the
розвитку
policies
процесу
in the
держави
state should
створення
be
і
aimed at human needs,
одна з пелюсток,
as people should be
вона
in the center
представляє
of
світ
all the
одного
efforts. So one
відмінного.
of these petals of this facets is
Тоді
dedicated
запропонували.
to
І
education and
показали,
culture.
як можна досягти, через що? Через
We are
певні
showing
глобальні
also
індикатори,
how
через
it
певні
could be
глобальні імпульси.
attained by
І
global
поставили ці
indices,
орієнтири
by
до
global
2030 року
indicators.
згідно
And
програми
the time
ООН
frame was
відповідальної і іноді
2030 back then, but it
нескладної,
was
але
a rather
там
ambitious
вкратце
target.
треба
And
ставити,
we were
що
called dreamers back
організація не має таких чітких
in
орієнтирів, все ж таки
in
активності
those days. But
підприємств дуже
unfortunately, we
чіткий
do not have clear guidance at this point in
чіткі
time in
цільові
Ukraine,
орієнтири для
and
нашої політики.
we need to have this clear
Багато
guidance and guidelines in
зустрічі
terms
зараз
of
визначення прогресу
Ukrainian
України в
policies.
досягненні цілей
While
Східного
working on
розвитку. Я якраз
yeah,
оцінюю
progress in
завдання та
SDG
індикатори
attainment by Ukraine, I'm assessing the
2030,
tasks and indicators on economic
також
goals,
поєдную з ціллю четвертою,
namely
як ціллю
goal
зростання.
8, 9,
І
17,
мене
and
прикро
4
вразило, що
quality
якраз
education. And
17
I
року
was
по
striking
розділу
by the
першому
fact
пункту
that within
практично
the
не відображено в
17
жодному завданні
SDG goals, the
якраз
cultural
головного
vector is
індикатору цілі 11
not properly reflected.
ставити
It is included
головне
only
завдання при
in one
сприяння змістовне
indicator in
забезпечення
the
збереження
11th
культурної і народної
SDG,
спадщини.
which is focused on the
При цьому
preservation of cultural
в 2010
heritage
році на порядок
as well
денний
as
була
nature.
поставлена така програмна
In
заява, яка називалась
2010,
Культура
there
четвертого
was the
пункту
program
розвитку,
announced,
де якраз
which was called
обговорюється,
"Culture is the
наскільки
fourth
важливим для
pillar
цього
of
процесу
sustainable
українцям
development,"
є
and that paper
культури,
focused
його
on
треба виділяти
the
окремо,
importance
власне,
of
я називаю його
culture for
другою
the social
культурною складовою
processes.
сталого
And
розвитку.
in that paper, the
І ця
notion of
програма
culture was
документ
called the fourth
відкриває
pillar of
неймовірну
sustainable
перспективу на
development.
зв'язок між культурою
This
і сталим
uh,
розвитком на основі такого
this program
подвійного підходу.
was
Саме
based
розвитку
on
стійкої політики
the
і,
development of
мабуть,
sustainable policies in
пропагування
the sphere of
культурних
culture
аспектів у всіх
and
громадських
promotion
політиках.
of
І
cultural
власне
aspects
це мене
as the
насторожує.
integral part of
Дозвольте
all the
поділитися
policy making
програмування
process.
дві складові.
Facilitation of the culture and
Це
also
важливо для компаній,
policy making.
оскільки на сьогоднішній день
And
нагальні
it
потреби
is
є
of
для
significance
приватного
also to the
підприємництва,
corporate world,
які,
since
власне,
the
участвують
entrepreneurs
для
have
інноваційних,
to
ризикованих іноді підприємницьких
make certain
рішень.
decisions, managerial
Я
decisions
при
that
цьому
could be the risky ones,
культуру
and they
четвертий
also
пункт, до
need
речі,
to
викладається в
take
багатьох
into consideration
школах,
the
включаючи
cultural
центрі
aspects.
сталого глобального
Culture, as the
співробітництва
fourth
Женевського
pillar,
університету
is
і
also taught
Інституту
at
соціального
in
підприємництва
educational
університетів штату
institutions
Мічиган.
like Cornell
Зараз
Institute
в
and
межах
Earn
теперішнього проекту
Institute, and
підготовки
also
до добровільного
the
національного
University
звіту
of the State of
з
Michigan.
оцінки
While
досягнення
preparing
узгоджених
the
цілей
National
цілого
Voluntary
розвитку.
Review
Ми не
on
так давно провели
SDG
дослідження
attainment,
серед
we have
студентів
carried out this
вищих освіт
survey
України,
among the
і ці
students
заходи
of higher
дослідження майже
educational
всю
establishments
Україну,
in Ukraine,
навіть
and we,
заклади, які
our respondents, were representing
базувалися на
all
окупованих
the regions
територіях,
of
зараз
Ukraine,
вважаються
even
цивільними.
those educational institutions
І
which were located
ви
in
бачите
the
одне з
occupied
запитань,
territories took
яке
in this
задається давно
survey, since
студентам,
they were
і
relocated. On this slide,
студенти
you can see
отримали
one
цікаві
of the
цікаві
questions
відповіді. Одна
that
різне про
was
те, які
asked
ефекти
during
впливають
this
далі
survey, and
і
in
на що
total, we
звертати
have
увагу в
collected
2030 році. Одне із питань якраз
432
було по
responses,
підтримку
and
сфер
one of the questions
захисту
was
сфери
dedicated
суспільного
to the
життя.
support of
І чесно
various
кажучи,
areas
це мене дещо
of
засмутило. Хоча
the life of
насправді
society. And
це
I
можливо
was a
було
bit
б
upset by the
підтримувати та
results, and
розбудовуючи сфер нашого життя,
I was a
але
bit
разом з
hopeful
тим
about them.
культура
I
потребує
was
не
upset
меншої
because
кількості
culture,
уваги
according
та
to the
форми від
respondents,
держави. Тобто
requires
лише
the least support
58%
from the state. Only
промивали, наприклад,
68% of the
підтримку
respondents said
державою
yes,
діджиталізації
um,
економіки, хоча це
unlike
практично
digitalization, which enjoyed
обов'язковий
much
процес,
more support.
або
Although
освіта,
this
яка
process is
займає найвищі
commercial
відсотки,
and
хоча б всього
education,
85 і
you see
91%.
the scores are 91% and
Чому
85%.
чому певною мірою дає надію, так?
Why, to a certain extent, it also gives us hope.
Можливо, тому що
Probably
студенти
because
починають розуміти
the students
саме через
start
культурні
understanding
креативні
culture through the prism of these cultural creative industries, which in fact are capable of bringing a lot of income and a lot of added value. And I would like to also share
з вами дослідженням
the results of a survey,
буквально коротко Українського культурного фонду.
very briefly, by
Я
the Ukrainian Cultural Fund.
була експертом
In
по
2022, I participated as an expert responsible for education and scholarship, and we looked at the projects mostly by young people who, even during the war, were suggesting their cultural projects. So in 2022, a survey was carried out.
представників культурних і креативних індустрій.
The representatives of cultural and creative industries were surveyed about how their life has changed with the beginning of the full-scale invasion. And here you can see a few graphs that are based on that report. If you want to find the full version, there is a link on the slide that you can currently see on your screen. And to be honest, opinions they're divided. And in 2023, quite some recently, the second survey also came out, and the Ukrainian Cultural Fund brought the experts together for the focus groups. I was also the member of one of the focus groups, and we discussed the challenges and ways to help and support certain cultural industries that currently are in a challenging position. And I will be brief. Even despite the large number of experts who stayed in the territory of Ukraine, we see that for the majority of the surveyed, actually not much has changed. As opposed to the onset of the full-scale war, only 15% have mentioned that they lost their work since the onset of the full-scale invasion. Now, the second important question that was raised was how did the full-scale invasion impact the work of the company where you're employed? And again, the majority said that there are either no commissions or their number has decreased, that they had to switch to the remote mode of working, but not all cultural industries can work in such a format. Next, when replying to the question about what kind of support have you used provided by the donors or the state since the onset of the full-scale war? And again, the vast majority, 48%, said that they did not use any of the support opportunities. And oftentimes the reasons for that were that the majority of the reasons was that a certain business or activity did not comply with the requirements of certain grants or state aid or support. Also, it is worth mentioning that the main format of support, the major format of support for the representatives of the cultural creative industries were the grants for their projects. And oftentimes those were international grants. And today, we, as the representatives of academia, we also represent creative industries. Even though in the economic activities, it is not clearly outlined. Nevertheless, we are gathered here to also support our research activities. Now, going back to the question of why do young people are not that interested in the cultural support. And of course, it's not because they don't understand the importance of culture, especially now, but probably young people don't understand how to commercialize culture, how to work within the creative economy, how to make the work in creative cultural industries self-sufficient. And I think that modern day youth can be called the children of the creative economy. And this is precisely why creative economy is called one of the factors for achieving the goals of sustainable development. First and foremost, creative economy, it's not only about cultural and creative industries. And in the doctrine, again, I started studying this concept, and in my opinion, and according to my colleagues as well, the main thing about creative economy is that it is not a type of economy. That, of course, it is not the same as cultural creative industries, as well as the product that we get as the output of that industry. Creative, we are saying that creative economy equals good quality economy, because the main concept of the creative economy is that to multiply, to scale up the talents, the intellectual capabilities, the knowledge, the skill, ideas. And as a rule, creative industries are connected to the highest added value, because investment as a rule goes into the soft infrastructure, basically the human capital. And of course, you also get back a lot from these industries. In the EU countries, creative industries, in fact, for years have been one of the most profitable sectors of economy. And by the way, IT, design, all of that are part and parcel of creative industries. In Europe, the countries with the most advanced creative industries and the biggest share of income in these industries, if we're talking about the GDP share, probably here the UK stands out, because over 60%, about 100 billion pounds sterling annually. Why so? Because Britain believes that the creativity is one of the important skills to form the GDP in the country. And on this slide, you can see a link to a video on YouTube. The speech by John Hawkins at TEDx, who also, during that speech, elaborates on how to create creative economy. And it is considered something universal, and children are all being born creative. The second one is freedom, and the third is shaping markets and connections for the successful implementation of the ideas. And cultural creative industries or clusters or creative/cultural hubs, in fact, are the components of the creative economy. And again, why are we talking about creative economy as the quality of economy? Because even complex things, even those types of the economic activities, those sectors of economy that are based on engineering, on using some advanced software, in fact, all of them contain creativity, because basically we're talking about inventing something, about inventing new ideas, new products, goods and services, and startups and patents. All of these are the elements of the creative economy. Now,
хочу перейти до
as I have
третього
mentioned earlier on, I would
пункту,
like to speak about the third part.
пов'язано, з іншого боку,
On the one hand, all of it is intertwined and interconnected. On the other hand, this is a slightly new concept
я почала досліджувати минулого
that I
року
started
і
studying
далі
last year.
буду розвивати
And next, I would like to elaborate on that.
економіки,
And it is something that is located at the crossroads of marketing, economy, and culture. And very interesting ideas emerge from that. This is a concept that is called corporate cultural responsibility, or CCR.
англійською CCR. Це також дуже конкретний
This is also a very concrete manifestation of the culture and use of the culture in shaping brands of companies and organizations. And this concept started emerging. There are very little research in the world, only found two so far dedicated to it.
корпоративна культурна відповідальність,
Nevertheless,
мабуть, частинкою
this probably is a part of the corporate social responsibility.
корпоративна соціальна
Because corporate social responsibility at the level of an enterprise basically
орієнтир на досягнення
is
конкретною компанією цілей сталого розвитку.
the benchmark to achieve the sustainable development goals. And corporate cultural responsibility is what guarantees the sustainable social and corporate development on all levels of a company. And to a certain extent, all of the stakeholders also look up to it. All the partners look up to it, as well as investors, which is the most important for business, and other stakeholders that are interested in the company growth and development. Now, some statistical data from 2022. There is a Center for Corporate Social Responsibility in Ukraine. It has been there for years, and CSR is really well developed and advanced in Ukraine. The statistics clearly demonstrates how important is implementation of all the provisions of social responsibility. 83% of companies in Ukraine are implementing CSR. 52% of companies have approved CSR strategies, and 67% of reputation is the CSR. Also, currently, the element of the social responsibility is introduction of the so-called ECG principles, environmental, social, corporate governance. So basically, combining these three components within companies. The data provided clearly demonstrates the importance of the social responsibility. And I would like to say that the concept of the corporate cultural responsibility as a part and parcel of the social responsibility popped up in the discourse for a reason, because a certain cultural identity, so to say national identity, clearly is not only something that pertains to Ukraine, not only when we're talking about globalization processes, as our well-known compatriot said. If I'm not mistaken, Mr. Haverlichen said, things globally act locally. So basically, you have to use and rely on those factors that matter for the corporate responsibility. However, in Ukraine, due to the conditions that emerged, cultural corporate responsibility requires even more attention. Unlike global practice, where there are actually very few researchers of this concept, and according to them, this cultural corporate responsibility has to be based and concentrated on the interaction between business and culture in a very concrete way, say via art. And in Ukraine, we can talk about corporate cultural responsibility of businesses, an element of supporting, preserving, and developing local ethnical culture that for the centuries has been oppressed. That is why CCR in Ukraine will relate not only to certain manifestations of art, be it painting or literature, but or rather the entire Ukrainian culture that requires more support development after the occupation by the Russian Empire, Soviet Union, and after the present day Russia-Ukraine war.
Визначення запропонованого ККВ
Speaking of
за наслідками
the
Голокосту за наслідками
definition
воєнного
of the
геноциду
notion of
в
corporate
Україні
cultural
суд
responsibility, in
був
our view, this
обвинувальник.
is the
Відповідно,
collective
функціонування
responsibility of businesses
інфраструктури і
for
модифікація
the
суспільства
renovation
досягнуло мира
of the factors of cultural
першої
identification of society,
насамперед культурні
including
цінності.
language,
Наше
faith,
суспільство формує ціннісні
and other
ориєнтації
components
та
of
відповідно
culture.
вимог
The
до
value
трансформації
orientations
суспільства.
are shaped under this
Щодо
notion in
ідеології,
accordance
що
to the
все-таки
company
що таке
brands.
бренд, це
Over
перша
here, it is
ідеологія,
important to
есенція
mention what
ідей і
the brand
цінностей
is. The
продукту.
brand is
Споживач
the
купує
core
не лише
and
там
the
товар,
essence
ніби
of the
товар, а
product, as the
визначну
consumer
цінність
does not
продукту.
simply buy the
І
product. The
основною
consumer buys
метою
this
створювання
value.
керування
And
брендом є
the main
створення
aim
особливого
of building a
населеного
brand
пункту
is
для
to create
споживача.
this strong
Кожен
image for
бренд
the
означає
consumer. And
спосіб
each brand
господарювання
always aims
засобами
at being perceived
ресурсів
as it was designed initially. And brand,
риторичний
first and
стимул
foremost,
для
is
комунікації.
about
Офіційний
communication,
єдиний
regular
бренд
communication that is
переслідування
supposed to be
певних цілей.
accurate, conveying all
Традиційно
the
бренди
features of this
передбачатимуть
brand.
роботу над сенсами,
Branding also includes
елементами ідеї
the
успіху,
um,
як логотип,
part
символ,
on conveying the
комунікаційна
senses
культура.
and also non-verbal part, including
Наразі
the merchandise
врахувати
and
треба, що
non-verbal
все ж таки
communication, visual
оскільки
representation.
ще
And
чітко не
currently,
встановлене
we
поняття
can also
корпоративної
say that since
відповідальності та не обґрунтована
corporate
інформаційна
cultural
відповідальність,
responsibility is
потенційно
not
все
um,
можемо
a
розглянути
notion that it has
підприємства
been
взаємодія і кооперації.
clearly
Можемо
defined, we
говорити про
still see
взаємодопоміжну
the lack of cooperation between
комунікацію
businesses and
через
the
залучання
culture
до культурних
sector.
проєктів
Businesses
нематеріального
are
джерела,
engaged into
передбаченого
the cultural
законом,
processes in a
що ніяким
non-systematic
чином
manner
не
by means of
піддавав
sponsorship
регуляції, тобто
mostly,
знати
which does
економічний
not
бюджет
help in
всередині
terms of
бізнес-структури.
their reputation and growing their businesses
Технологія
in
спонсорські
a
внески
long-term and medium-term perspective. Besides, there is no opportunity to use the brand loyalty of the customers. Well, actually, the interaction between
традиції
businesses and
можна
culture
побачити,
is
що це
beneficial to
постійний
both
спосіб
sides. And
розвивання
on this
самовидову
slide, you can see that this is the
створює
process
культуру в
of
своєму
a
житті.
synergy,
Культура
since
використовується в
the
суспільності
brand is creating a culture and disseminating this cultural elements. And on the other hand, it is strengthened by this cultural aspect. And business is also able to engage the creative part of the customers who are capable of creating the content for the brand. In its turn, brands are also able to engage the mass audience. But speaking about economic targets for the brands, for the corporate world, it's about loyalty of the customers
Очікується можливість залучити
and
більше відвідувачів, слухачів,
culture is
споживачів
used as the factor
країни
to attract
гостей.
more
Щодо
customers thanks to the
незначних
support.
нечисельних дослідників явища
One
корпоративної культурної
one
відповідальності
of the
досліджує
researchers of the
Маргарита
corporate
свої
cultural
дані
responsibility,
визначили
Michael
понад
Bzdak,
30 видів корпоративної культурної
is
діяльності рівнями залученості
showing us
партнерів.
this table of
Він якраз
the business
показує те,
engagement, and
що
you see that
можуть бути прямі і
there
посередкові
should there
впливи
could be a direct and indirect influence in the sphere of a corporate cultural responsibility. And if this notion is introduced, it may have a direct and indirect impact on
Ця
the
матриця
work of the
Також
companies
показує
and
гру
the
з
representation of
поглибленням
the
бізнесу і
brands.
культури
Besides,
без
in this table, we
роботи
see that
фізичної.
with the
Дивідендовий
deeper
виплат від
cooperation between
залученості
cultural
співробітної
sector
та
and
репутації бізнесу,
businesses,
культура також
the businesses
має
could
велику
benefit in terms of
відповідь на
engagement of their
реалізацію інших
employees,
інтересів.
and the cultural
Наприклад,
sector
одним
would
з важливих
engage,
проявів
would
корпоративної
enjoy
відповідальності
broader
сервісу в
support
Україні
on the
була
part of
набагато
business in
підтримка
terms of
української
the
мови.
projects they are carrying
Особливо
out.
на фоні
For
вчорашніх
instance,
скандалів з
the
Pfizer.
Ukrainian language
Всі
could be an
соціальні
example.
прояви та всі
Taking into
заходи,
consideration yesterday's scandal with Irina Farion,
провокативні, це ніколи не
we know that
примусить слідчих.
this type
Ми
of
говоримо про таку певну цивілізовану підтримку.
this type of
Звичайно,
attitude
ми
is
чимало
not what we have in mind. We are talking
сьогодні.
about civilized, polite communication.
І ми розуміємо це, тут не треба зайвий раз наголошувати про те,
We
що
do
це один
understand
з
that
найцінніших
culture
елементів
is
місцевих
essential
її
for the
поширення на нашій
nation.
території,
I'm
на
sure we are
середовище
all aware
державного
of
життя,
that,
національної
and
ідентичності населення
that
цієї держави.
the language plays a
На жаль,
crucial role in terms
українські
of the
бізнеси
feeling of
часто
national
стикалися з
identity.
довгим часом ігноруванням
Unfortunately,
української мови.
Ukrainian businesses used
Можна
to
сказати,
ignore the language
протягом
factor
десятків
and used to
в
neglect the Ukrainian language for
від
quite a
незалежності
while.
про проголошення
During the
незалежності
past
України,
3 decades,
і місцеві
starting from the
фермери
proclamation of
було трохи більш
independence of
об'єднаних
Ukraine,
Росією і занурювало
businesses
в російський
were
інформаційно-культурне
trying
поле, в тому числі
to
і в певна
dissolve the
такий
borders
розгон
between
впливових
Ukrainian
компаній насправді
corporate world and Russian corporate world,
особливо регіональних національних вибачте,
since many companies
міжнародних корпорацій. Вони мали представництво в східній
had
Європі
branch
саме
offices
Росії, оскільки
in
Росія
Russia,
представляла
and the international companies for the Eastern
От.
Europe usually had the
Якщо
headquarters for the
говорити,
region based
наприклад,
in Russia.
2003 рік, то
Speaking
там
of
теж за дослідженнями, в тому
2003,
числі
according to
інституту
the
Михайла Винницького, про те, що
researchers,
половина населення України це щонайменше
in,
1300
according to Mikhail
спрацювала
Vinnytsky,
російською
half
мовою.
of the
Хоча тут не можна
population was
звинувачувати тільки
speaking
бізнесів,
Russian, but of
але
course we
я
cannot blame
вважаю,
only
що
the corporate
на
world for
прикладі
that.
Києво-Могилянської
That
академії, коли я була
in the case of
наставником економічного
Kyiv Academy, when
професійний
I was
час
the dean of
майже
the Department of
час серіалу, і тут
Economics,
декілька літ викладалася
for a
англійська мова,
year,
українська мова це професійний
and
язик,
then for
хоча
2 years,
більшу
the
ділянку
Ukrainian language
цих
was
студентів
taught separately, and we were
на
preparing our students to
на
use
компетенції, в
the
тому числі в
Ukrainian
розумінні
language
філософії української мови і тому
in
подібне,
terms
наділили
of
важливою увагою.
deepening the understanding of also the
Як
philosophy of the
було
Ukrainian
видно з
language.
навчання в
But
факультету,
I heard some
наш факультет
allegations
займається
with
певним
regard
таким
to
престижним
our
заняттям, тому
department
що
that
викладач
we
викладав
were
в перші роки
promoting the Russian language since the first year of study for the bachelor degree. And sometimes, if students are joining certain subjects only during the third and fourth year, they hear that the language of communication is the Russian language. We wanted to look closer at those allegations, and we found out the following. The students starting from the second, third year of study usually started working. They joined the corporate sector, and mostly they were communicating in Russian at work. Therefore, our goals for 2019 and 2020 for us was to develop the glossary for Ukrainian business, as we even had the roundtable with the Kimvila Business School. Businesses suffer a lot from this phenomenon as well, since there is the lack of business terminology in Ukrainian, and it has to be taught. I would like also to say a couple of words about the law on advertising. advertisement as of
закону повинна була
2003.
тільки
According to
бути
Article
нерухоме
6 of
майно, тобто
this
окремо
law,
українською мовою.
the
Дослівно кажучи про цей випадок.
advertisement
Це
in
поняття ще є.
Ukraine is
Реклама
supposed to
розповсюджується в
be
інтернеті в
only
Україні
in
виключно українською мовою.
Ukrainian.
Зареєстровані у встановленому порядку знаки
And here
незалежно
I
від кольору
quote,
логотипу
all the
будуть
advertising in the territory of
записані в
Ukraine
оригіналу.
is to be carried out
По-іншому
in the
виглядає
Ukrainian language. Only the
публікуватися
logo
українською
could
мовою.
be
На ці
presented
товари
in the
поступово
original language,
європейські
but
компанії
it
наводять
should be
виключно
also
українську мову.
translated into the Ukrainian
Але
language.
ще
Other
буквально через
information
півроку, в цьому ж
is
2003-му,
to be translated into the Ukrainian language. But
виробництво рекламних
in
засобів чи засобів дільниць
2003,
була
some
переглянута, і вона
lobbyists
була зовсім іншого
were able
змісту.
to get
Застосування
this
мови оригіналу
law
здійснюється є
to the
відповідно до
review,
законодавства України про
and
мову. Знаки для
it was
товарів
amended.
використовуються у рекламі у тому вигляді, в якому їм надана
The
правова опора в Україні
the
відповідно чинному
logos
законодавству,
are to be
зокрема у
depicted
статті 6 Паризької
in the
конвенції про права
language
людини.
that is the original language in
Тобто,
accordance with
знову ж
the
таки,
Paris
хоча ми
Convention
чули, звичайно,
on
переважно реклама
the
звучала
protection
українською мовою,
of
проте
corporate
лобістам завжди
property.
вистачало
And
слів
even though there were some attempts to
Ну,
support the
а
Ukrainian language
сьогодні
development for
якраз
businesses, they were
вже ми
always the
практично
lobbyists
можемо говорити,
championing for the
це
Russian
визнаний
language.
факт, доконаний, визнаний в світі
Nowadays, we know that
геноциду
there
російської
was
федерації.
the genocide
Програма охорони
of the
бренду та
Ukrainian nation
популяризації
on the
розвитку
part of the
українського
Russian
бізнесу
Federation.
є, мабуть,
Therefore, the
актуальнішим, ніж будь-коли. І
growth
я
of
думаю, що товариство
development of Ukrainian
бізнес може
culture,
справитися з цим
especially for
завданням
businesses,
далі
becomes
попереду.
more and
Чому
more
з'являється ряд
important.
які просувають бренд
Businesses should be more responsible
з метою
when
реклами,
they
зокрема
choose influencers to
української культури
promote
серед та
their
способами
products in the
комунікації
social
України.
network.
Пріоритетне надання спонсорської
And
премії, це може бути
they
не
could
лише фінансова,
also
це будь-яка реклама
prioritize
з метою
the
українським культурним
projects
діячам та
with
проектам руху.
Ukrainian
Перевірка
cultural
інформації,
elements.
культури
And
та
they should
української мови,
also
використання їх
check and
послуги та
verify
товарів.
the
Це дуже
information
важливий елемент
on
бізнесу,
history of
fact-checking, щоб
Ukraine.
не
This is an important
поширювати
component,
недостоверну
so-called
інформацію.
fact-checking, to
Буквально пару
avoid
слів
misinformation.
приклади застосування такого, можна
Let me give
сказати,
you a couple of
перформативного
examples of
застосування
the application
корпоративної
of
відповідальності в Україні
corporate
в
cultural
підтримку
responsibility
українськими
concept in
інфлюенсерами та
Ukraine by
бізнесом України.
Ukrainian companies
Такі
or
позитивні
international companies operating in
приклади.
Ukraine. One of
Це
the success
українське виробництво
stories
напоїв Dodo Socks.
is the story of Dodo
Дуже приємно
Socks
їх
brand.
бачити. Це,
I'm very pleased
скажімо так,
to share the story of this
демонстрування
brand,
корпоративно-культурної відповідальності на
as
найвищому
they are
рівні.
using the
Вони
corporate
створюють
cultural
простір
responsibility at the
тут
deepest
з
level, at the
національними
level of the
орнаментами,
product, since
символами,
they are
слоганами українських національних
manufacturing
підприємств. Керівництво має
Ukrainian
дивитися в
products
майбутнє
with
розумінням,
Ukrainian
чи до того,
traditional
як це
ornaments,
станеться,
and
до
that
того
they
готують стримувати.
have been working in such a
Використовують
mode
дійсно
before the
таких
war, before it
інфлюенсерів,
became
як
mainstream.
телебачення
They are
Один,
engaging
України,
such
українські
influencers as
телеканали і
Телебачення Торонto,
дійсно
Ukrainer,
працюють
and
з
also they are
створенням
engaging musicians like Alona, Latex
так,
Fauna,
кількість
and they are
мільйонів
trying to
інстаграмів,
contribute
де
to the
отримали
positive image.
понад 70 тисяч
In
підписників,
Instagram, they have over
нестабільний хороший показник.
70,000 subscribers,
Далі знову
which
ж таки
is
надавати
quite
російські
impressive
ЗМІ,
for a small business.
видавати там зайва
Another
ліпу,
success story is Всі
гарно
свої.
виглядає
Sorry, I
і
misspelled
використовується
the name of this
підтримка
project. I'm sure you've all heard
українських
about it.
брендів,
They are
реклама,
supporting
і
Ukrainian
також проявляється проукраїнська позиція
companies, and they are supporting them in different formats, and they are very vocal about their pro-Ukrainian position. And there are also some negative cases like Puma. they used, they engaged Ivan Dorn, who is um, on the database because he went to Crimea and because he was promoting some ideas of the brotherhood between Ukrainians and Russia. And even before the full-scale invasion, they had to face a lot of public outcry with regard to his engagement, and there were some practical consequences for them.
В такі підсумкові
Now,
таблиці.
winding up, you can see the summary in this table, basically steps on how to implement CCR in Ukrainian business, how to make our brand stronger, and to a certain extent, this has to become the part of the marketing because branding is a part of marketing activities in a company. And these main four steps are supposed to happen one after another. They are fundamental. And what added value can these steps contribute? Cultural and social. Cultural and social development, popularization of Ukrainian culture in Ukraine and worldwide, as well as business and communication, reducing reputation risks of business and strengthen the reputation of the company or its brand among Ukrainian consumers. And of course, this is if everything is done properly, works in the long run. Further research in corporate cultural responsibility in Ukraine, of course, will be based on the field studies, surveying business, maybe comparing it with business in other countries, how they understand the concept, how they use it. And of course, I hope that there will be more positive examples rather than the negative ones. And everything that I have elaborated on are the concepts or those things that will help Ukraine achieve the sustainable development goals because the creative economy, even though it is only reflected in goal 8, and it is an objective to develop creative economy. It is one of the objectives. But in fact, there's creativity, human capital, talents, ideas, inventing new things, etc., will help achieving all or almost all sustainable development goals. Thank you. This is it from me for now. Thank you for your attention. Looking forward to your questions. Thank you so very much, Oleksandra, for such an amazing presentation, for food for thought. And I see that colleagues are already willing to jump in and start the discussion. Oleksandra, maybe you could stop sharing your screen. Yeah, sure. Give me a second. I don't know in which order we go. Who goes first, Tatiana or Yevhen? Tatiana, you go first. Good afternoon. It is a pleasure to see all of you. Thank you so much, Oleksandra, for such an interesting presentation and for a relevant topic. I have a following question. So your presentation has to do with the role of culture in general in Ukraine achieving sustainable development goals. Are you planning to look at the libraries in your research, because they also are cultural institutions, because libraries are making a huge contribution in achieving sustainable development goals. And Ukrainian Librarian Association implemented a project that was aimed at the libraries helping to achieve the sustainable development goals by 2030. Also, a special remote course was developed, libraries' role in achieving sustainable development goals. And there is also experience that was presented abroad, but in Ukraine, we also have examples when libraries are contributing to the development of business, and namely small and medium business. Special business centers are created on the premises of libraries. Hence, it helps us to increase the capabilities and capacities of communities. And hence, my question is, are you planning to also include that experience, or will you focus in your research on creative industry specifically? Thank you. Well, of course, libraries are also covered by the cultural creative industries. And by the way, there is a very interesting research by the British Association called NASTA. They have quite a few different research published about the so-called creative intensity of certain cultural industries. And libraries are actually among the most advanced. And my opinion is because the most of my professional life was dedicated to the Kiev Mohyla Academy. And I saw how much attention was always paid to the libraries, all the libraries in Kiev Mohyla Academy. And if we're talking about the education and science component, historically, library was always the center of the university ecosystem, specifically the library, even though we live in the digitalized era. As a researcher of the cultural creative industries, clearly, I'm not going to ignore libraries. Moreover, we were preparing a suggestion regarding the amendments to the law on culture, where the types of economic activities are mentioned that fall within the cultural creative industries. And they have not yet taken into account our suggestions, but I think we will be promoting that, lobbying that, the same as research, education, and the role of the libraries, I think, the same as with the art. It will be changing and evolving, but it clearly will not be diminished. I can guarantee that to you. So, again, all the components are hard to cover, but we're talking about strengthening our cultural creative industries. Yeah, we definitely need to do that. Thank you so much. Rather than that, yes, the global experience of the libraries is always the foundation of any university. And those universities who don't understand that are in trouble. Well, it's not only about education and science. Libraries do a lot in terms of environment awareness raising, about business support, health. So there are very many different factors, and there is data from the Ukrainian libraries because our libraries do a lot of stuff. Even despite very poor financing, they are doing quite an impressive work, and I think that it could enrich your research. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, yeah, Yevhan, go ahead. Hello, everyone. Alexandra, thank you so much for such an interesting presentation. You always taking notes during your presentation so that I could go back to that. For example, when you were talking about creating creative industries and about the sustainable development, of course, I was thinking about the people who do that. It is done by people, and I started thinking about Richard Florida, professor of Toronto University, and the concept of the creative class that is being criticized by certain researchers. Yeah. They're supported, though. There's the concept provides for 3T, technology, talent, and tolerance. And basically everything is built upon all of that. And I have a question regarding Ukraine. If you look through the prism of the concept by Richard Florent, what is happening with the creative class in Ukraine? And or maybe in this harsh conditions of the global and regional competition, can Ukraine even withstand this competition? For example, if we look at these indices of creative development and sustainable development, say even prior to the war, they're not going to be that high, and we do not know the situation presently. So the question is, what do we need to do practically to become attractive? Because everything clearly depends on conditions and on those people that will be creating what you were talking about. Thank you. Thank you so much, Johan. This is an incredibly interesting question. And I also have research about a more in-depth analysis of the Global Creative Index that, as you have righteously mentioned, speaks volumes or is based on the 3T model. And from what I know, in 2011, it was introduced and it is calculated once every 4 years. I don't remember the places in Ukraine in 2011, but remember that in 2015, Ukraine was on the 45th position among 130 plus countries. And in 2019, it was on the 49th place. And at the same time, talking about talent and technology, Ukraine actually is on good positions. It is among 20 to 30 top countries. But the biggest challenge for us is the factor of tolerance. It may seem, what does tolerance have to do with the creative index? Here we're talking about attitude towards any categories, not only social, well, how do I put it? I'm missing the word in Ukrainian. I'm sorry that I cannot come up with the word. You know, those socially not very good, so to say. And by the way, speaking of tolerance, the index has been deteriorating. Also, we should mention creating conditions for the human capital to obtain the characteristics of the social capital. And what is the difference? What is the problem? That the human capital in Ukraine is pretty rich, but if we're talking about a socialization, well, of course, it poses a question of whether we can get to the top positions. And human capital becomes high social capital when we have social lifts in healthcare, in education, and in other socially important areas and domains. If we look at the creative class, I would like to say that in Ukraine, the potential is still very big because we always were in the conditions of certain restrictions, including certain, so to say, corruption related restrictions, inability to basically use certain social things. And level of the creative class, and to a certain extent, development of communication, social ties in Ukraine is at a very high level. And I think to get to certain positions in the context of global creative index, we have to work with tolerance in the society. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That was an amazing question. Thank you so much, Johan. Thank you, Alexandra. I've already signaled 1 minute left for Maria's question. So please be brief.
Не знаю, я щось таке ж заслухалась. Скажіть, будь
Thank you.
ласка,
I was listening so carefully to the previous interventions so that I almost forgot my question. Well, don't you think that nowadays this cultural corporate cultural responsibility is actually replacing the corporate social responsibility? And I see this notion as ethics for 10 years already. My point of view is like this. And, you know, I believe that this corporate social responsibility is now downgraded, and we see fewer projects of corporate social responsibility. And I believe that nowadays we see uh, certain backsliding. Or do you think that the one is replacing the other? Well, I was considering corporate cultural responsibility being the part of corporate social responsibility, and I believe that corporate social responsibility is much broader in scope, and it is part of ESG principles.
Не скорочується, тому що це вимога
And I do not see any backsliding, and I believe that this is explained by the time, as you will not be able to find reliable partners if you do not have your corporate social responsibility. For your investors, for your employees, it matters a lot. In Ukraine, there was the mix-up between corporate social responsibility and requirements under the legal framework of Ukraine. Some of the companies were claiming that they are socially responsible because they are providing the leave of absence to their employees, or because they are providing paid vacation to their employees. But that is the requirement under the law. This is not a CSR example. And those who were claiming to be socially responsible, in reality, were never socially responsible. With the war, we see that there is still some misunderstanding when it comes to corporate social responsibility. And this is a requirement, global requirement, as the bar is set high, and Ukrainian companies have to meet these standards if they want to be a part of the global chains and global interactions. Well, corporate social cultural responsibility, in my view, is the part of corporate social responsibility. Thank you, dear colleagues, for being active, and thank you for your questions. Thank you, dear colleagues, and now let's switch to the second part of our webinar. And now